Next, I would like to ask the representatives of Save the Bay if they would come forward and identify themselves and perhaps proceed.
Senator, thank you very much. My name is Jonathan Stone, Executive Director of Save the Bay. I have a few remarks that I'd like to offer, if I might.
Well, I do want one of the things, this is kind of our environmental, and Save the Bay, while I have had differences with the organization over the years, certainly the history goes back a long, long way into what the Bay was in the 60s and what has become. People like Louise Durfee and Trudy Cox and a lot of folks are virtual legend in the state, and hopefully you will live up to that. And again, as the stewards of the Bay in many respects, your comments and observations are very much desired by myself anyway, and I believe the commission members. So if you would proceed, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. And I freely admit to anyone who asks me that I fill very big shoes. Kurt Spaulding and Trudy and John Scanlon before Trudy.
And if I'm not mistaken, they were high heels. A little difficult for most guys to get into, but
I have big shoes to fill, whatever the heels. Thank you. Thank you for convening this task force. The topic is of great consequence for the citizens of Rhode Island. These hearings are an important opportunity to bring to light the harmful impact of the construction of an LNG terminal in Mount Hope Bay, the impact that will have on our citizens and our environment. And I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak to you about the assessment, our assessment of the Hess proposal and our campaign to stop it. For 40 years, Save the Bay has defended Narragansett Bay against ill-conceived and environmentally damaging projects. Through our efforts with the support of citizens and political leaders like yourselves, we have protected Narragansett Bay from oil refineries, coal-fired power plants, and yes, LNG terminals. While Save the Bay has fought against many damaging projects, we have consistently supported economic development along our coastline that is compatible with the goals of protecting the health of Rhode Island's greatest natural resource, assuring public access, and balancing the many competing uses of Narragansett Bay and its surrounding waters. We have worked cooperatively with the Port of Providence, the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association, the Port of Quonset, and the Army Corps of Engineers to promote the maintenance of ship channels and port and marina facilities. We support working waterfronts and commercial uses of the bay. We have advocated for the development of offshore wind farms properly sited and support ongoing efforts by our state environmental agencies to promote marine spatial planning and sound coastal management. Sadly, the Hess project defies common sense and is an affront to decades of effort to clean up the bay and improve public access to Rhode Island's most valuable natural resource. Save the Bay is opposed to the Hess in-bay project. We take great umbrage at the term offshore. This is not offshore. We are opposed to this in-bay project on several grounds. First, we don't believe it's needed. Second, it will harm the bay. And third, it gives away a public resource to a private company at the public's expense. The cumulative costs of this project argue overwhelmingly against its approval. In the years since Hess proposed this ill-conceived project, other sources of LNG for the New England market have come online. To gain federal approval, the company is required to demonstrate that their project is still necessary and better than these alternatives. We believe that Hess has failed to do this, and we argue strongly that as a result, the project is not permittable under federal law. Others here today will be outlining the disruption and harm this project will inflict on the many other users and residents of Narragansett Bay. Those impacts figure prominently in our opposition to this project. However, you have asked me to address specifically the environmental impact of the Hess in-bay proposal, so let me concentrate on this aspect of the project. Today, Narragansett Bay, including Mount Hope Bay, is the most intensively used recreational bay on the East Coast. It is also an estuary of extraordinary biological productivity. Narragansett Bay, and most importantly, the northern shallow reaches of the bay are prime spawning grounds for dozens of species of commercial groundfish, migratory fish, and game fish. And I might just draw your attention to the chart at my right, and you'll see the light blue zones of the bay, particularly in the northern reaches, Mount Hope Bay, the Providence River, north of Conimicut, East Greenwich, or Greenwich Bay, and the upper reaches of the Sakonnet River. Those blue areas are very shallow waters. Those are the prime spawning grounds we're talking about. Narragansett Bay is an estuary of national significance. Mount Hope Bay is one of the largest and most productive spawning habitats within Narragansett Bay. The Taunton River, which I'll point out, flows in to the Mount Hope Bay from the northeast, as you can see near the City of Fall River, the upper right-hand corner of the chart. Has been nationally recognized for its important ecological value under the Department of Interior's Wild and Scenic River designation. The shallow waters of Mount Hope Bay, particularly waters in less than 20 feet in depth, are prime spawning habitat for winter flounder, summer flounder, cod, bass, bluefish, tautog, oysters, quahogs, American eels, and many other species. Mount Hope Bay and the Taunton River are prime feeding and spawning grounds for herring, shad, menhaden, harbor seals, and rare Atlantic sturgeon. Against this backdrop of biological productivity, the HESS project presents serious and damaging short-term and long-term impacts. First, let's look at the construction impacts. HESS has proposed dredging more than 3 million cubic yards of sediment. If allowed to proceed, this will be the largest private dredging project in Narragansett Bay history. Emphasis on private. This is a private developer dredging the bay. 191 acres of Mount Hope Bay bottom will be disturbed by the dredging impacts. The company will dredge a channel to its proposed terminal site, a 4.25-mile pipeline trench, and a turning basin. About 10%, to our understanding, about 10% of the dredging will occur in Rhode Island waters. I think Grover mentioned some of the issues in deepening the federal ship channel. The dredging process will result in a plume of suspended sediment that will drift down the bay into Rhode Island waters. The sediments churned up by the dredging may contain toxic materials. There's increasing evidence that they, in fact, do contain toxic materials that have accumulated on the seafloor after decades of industrial pollution from the City of Fall River. Rhode Island's Department of Environmental Management has determined that the project will violate water quality standards in Rhode Island waters and has denied the company the water quality certification necessary to proceed with construction. Dredge spoils from the project, as been mentioned by Grover, will be transported through Rhode Island waters to a dredge disposal site in Rhode Island Sound, adding additional burden to the state without any public benefit. Private benefit, yes. Public benefit, no. Now let's turn our attention to the long-term operational impacts of the project. By the company's own proposal, the project will result in the permanent loss of 73 acres of essential winter flounder habitat. 73 acres will be dredged to a depth of 45 feet, too deep for winter flounder to spawn. The deep channel carved across Mount Hope Bay will have permanent impacts on the circulation of water throughout Mount Hope Bay. The trench created by the dredging may result in very low dissolved oxygen levels and create hypoxic conditions which can lead to dead zones on the ocean floor. Water temperatures may be altered by changing water circulation. The operation of the terminal will likely have ongoing detrimental impacts. These include higher turbidity levels from the wash of tugboat and tanker propellers. Stirred up sediment would pose the risk of smothering fish larvae and shellfish beds. Operation of the terminal will also increase noise levels and artificial light that poses risk to bird life and endangered mammals. Spar Island, which if you look closely after the session is clearly marked on the chart, is a short distance from the proposed terminal site, and it is a known winter haul-out site for federally protected harbor seals. It is quite likely that maintenance dredging will be required over time. There is a significant risk of entrainment of fish and other living organisms through the loading of ballast water into LNG tankers once they have offloaded their fuel. These short-term and long-term impacts threaten to set back 2 decades of effort to clean up Mount Hope Bay and restore several important fisheries. I want to emphasize this. Nearly $700 million is being invested to address thermal pollution issues at Brayton Point and stormwater pollution in Fall River. These investments are creating hundreds of jobs for local workers with a long-term positive impact on the economy and on the environment.